So welcome everybody, and welcome to those who are new, and welcome to those who are returning. I'm going to lead the introductions to the Master of Ceremonies, Jacob Stevens, tonight, but thank you for coming as always. I hope you have a good time, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Joe. All right. Appreciate it. Well, welcome everybody. Happy Chinese New Year. How long we're actually going to have these things up in here, but I mean, it's really tasteful and colorful, and I love it, so making too much fun. So I don't know what is wrong with you people that I want to be outside, honestly. I don't know what you guys are doing in a place like this on a day like this. But,
it's the beer and the pizza.
It's the beer and the pizza, and obviously a passion for quality engineering, don't deny it. So, yeah, so that's what we're here for. Okay, so it just kind of shuffled up, and I think I'm going to go first. But before I do that, let me introduce you guys to the other speakers that we have. And when they get up here, then they'll get a little bit more of an introduction to themselves. But this is one of my favorite people in the world, Samantha Kalman. Really admire her work. And so you just got done working at Amazon, right? And so now you are venturing back into the world of games.
Yes.
Yes, and she's going to be talking to us about prototyping, which is an area of quality that this event rarely touches on. So I'm really interested in that, and I should have pulled Dave up here before and spent more time talking to him. I'm sorry. But, David, what was your last name again?
Mozealous.
Mozealous. And you were also from Amazon.
Correct.
Okay. And can you give just a brief nugget, or do you want? I don't want to steal your thunder. Do you want to?
I'll wait.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got the mystery. It's probably going. I don't want to be thrown out of the water. We'll save the best for last. We'll let Dave go last. And so I just want to get this one out of my system so you can already see the title of this. And so the reason I chose this subject, I gave Shelley a number of suggestions here, but in a lot of the discussions that I've had with a lot of people, I end up coming across what I find is a lot of like anti-tool rhetoric. I don't know if anybody else has come across that, but with a lot of the discussions. Maybe it's just the Bach brothers circle that I've spent so many years hanging out with. I really highly respect them, but there's a lot of so much discussion about the limitations and pitfalls of automation and all the things that it will not do for you and all the things that you need to watch out for because you have to be a human and sapient and be able to check it yourself and everything. And I basically agree. I mean, I think that's fine. But what I've found over the years as my career has progressed is that I was probably influenced so much that I was really kind of overly dismissive of automation. So maybe I'm just weak-minded and just overly influential. But I've come to this point where I feel like there's just not actually enough, just discussions about tools and what they can do for people. And I just hope that people aren't, if they're not, I don't want people to be overwhelmed or, I'm trying to think of the word, intimidated by using automation tools, because it's really not that bad. And so I thought, you know what, QASIG, we don't talk about tools a lot, so this is a tool that I want to talk about. And so this is a trade federation, if you guys haven't heard of that before. It's open source, Google made it, it's part of the Android open source project. You can use this right now if you want. You can go get the source, you can download it, you can use the clips for free, and there are tutorials all over the web, both for building an Android app and using Trade Federation. And so it's DIY skill set building, so I highly recommend it. It's an extension of JUnit. I almost used a JUnit tutorial tonight, but maybe the day before I never had. But so anyway, so the mobile automation landscape is really not mature right now. I've been in mobile for a number of years and really kind of been interested in how this is all going to play out. And there's a number of items like this, but this is probably further along than a lot of other things that are going defined out there. But it's got its limitations, and that's really kind of the feature set that I'll get to. And so, I don't know if any of you guys are Java fans in here, but I'm not. So, but you got to use Java. So, let's see. Let's take a look at how it fits in the basic picture. You can do it without continuous integration, but this is a whole other discussion. But I think without continuous integration, the value that the test automation brings is just largely diminished. So I would highly recommend we start there before doing anything like this. But if you're familiar with Android at all, APK that's the name of an app. That's a app extension, file extension. And so all of your tests and all the utilities are going to be pushed and compiled into an APK. And then Trade Federation is going to be the utility that enables continuous testing across multiple devices concurrently. Obviously, it's got some logging and results capabilities as well. That's basically what it is in a nutshell. So APK, you're going to define that with there's an Android makefile and a manifest, and that's how you're going to determine what each of your tests that you want to include. And so every test run, you can use a different set of tests, obviously. And so you package it, you push it, and that's right. So I want to show you guys a bit of an example here. Yeah, JUnit, this is an extension of JUnit. The structure of JUnit is very simple. The idea is you set up, you test something, you check for it, and then you tear it down and you keep it very modular. And you check something with asserts. If you guys aren't familiar with asserts, it's runtime condition checking. So I just tried to look this up on the fly. I hope it's not. Looks too bad, but if you don't understand this very well, here is the test. I'll get into the rest of the class in a moment. You have a number of tests, and this test is going to take a number of our users, and we're going to attempt to authenticate them with Facebook. A lot of apps, a lot of mobile apps, they want you to sign in with Facebook. You're already authenticated on your phone, so this should be a feature that should be good, right? And I'll explain that in a moment. And then we assert, are we authenticated? So that's just one test, and you can have multiple tests in a class. This class has a number of private members here that they look like they're kind of hard-coded, but what the option attribute is for is really kind of what the core Trade Federation is all about. And so when you call this test and you're going to use these option attributes, you can define a different value for them. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. The test, you can assemble them into XML files. Here's a test, here's a test. And so with the scenario that I gave, let's say you can create these user types, and each one could be a different permutation of a number of different properties or attributes that the user has, like user number 1 is going to be gender male, and user number 2, his relationship is complicated. Whatever the properties are going to be there, right? And you assemble those into an XML document, and then when you execute the entire suite using Trade Federation, it's just going to blast through those one by one. But it's actually multifaceted. So I had mentioned the options, the wait time. This same exact test here, I added a sleep element there. And so I can run through it, checking all of these, and I can actually run the same test, and I can change a different parameter. So that's why it ends up being really multifaceted and just really modular and very, very, very extensible. And when you run it from the command line, launch Trade Federation, and you can have all these XML test packages, and you can actually override them right here as well, calling that same option attribute that you defined earlier on. So I'm trying to run really fast because I know we don't have too much time. So that's what Trade Federation looks like. I also wanted to fit in just a bit of a discussion on what Trade Federation does, because it does have a number of limitations, but it's going to help you out a lot. It's really going to make your thumbs much bigger, so to speak. It's going to free up your time for exploratory testing. I made these green because I had given another mobile talk a couple of years ago, laid out the basic elements of consideration for any given mobile scenario. And I tried to come up with a mnemonic about it, but it's PC flood. But they're supposed to be weird, and that's why they work, right? That's why you're going to remember that. And so platform, carrier, feature, location, user, and device. So if you're going to automate something for Android, the device, that's solid. You're going to be verifying your compatibility. That's going to look really good. And then the feature, that's also going to be covered, obviously. That's the test that you're writing. The rest of those considerations, the automation isn't really going to help you with very much. And so there's things that you're going to want to manage externally. And so as I go back to what Trade Federation does for you, it covers device and feature considerations, but it's not going to be the whole shebang for you. There is no silver bullet, and obviously what it doesn't do, it's not going to help you with iOS or Windows Phone 7 or UNX and BlackBerry or anything else, which you can still use it for like a greater part of your mobile strategy, but I would not recommend housing all of your testing logic inside one particular platform-specific tool. And that's the way the Trade Federation is designed. You're housing all of your testing logic in there. So, I mean, if you have all of your test logic in CI and you wanted to deploy it to multiple devices, but it's written in Java and it's got to be Objective-C on iOS, then you know, you're going to run into a bit of a problem there. So that's a drawback. You can port all these, you can keep your tests in whatever language you want, import them into Java, and add the option attributes and compile these XML configuration files and execute that. That's going to be very tedious, but it may be a little bit less tedious than actually performing all of this manually. So yeah, automation is good for verifying functionality, is not broken, much more than it is for finding defects. But thankfully, since Trade Federation covers so much of your device-specific coverage, the value actually still remains high, because in mobile, there are so many, in my experience, most of the defects are actually going to be really device-specific. There's a lot of race conditions and chipset compatibility issues and microcode reporting issues that bubble up and everything. You know, you can have the same scenario on a whole bunch of devices, and then one device, you do the same scenario in the slightest little bit permutation, you'll find a really big issue, and everything else just looks brilliant. So they're really kind of hard to pin down, and that's one reason why you want to free up all the low-level execution for the machine to do it so that you can move on. So there you go. That's my presentation. I think we do have some time for Q&A. Does anybody want to lob one at me?
How hard or easy was it to get your first test running through the Trade Federation ecosystem, through the framework? How long did it take?
Pretty easy, but a lot of that wasn't my work. So the so the app that you're going to push, I mean, this is all the test logic, but if you know, it's all going to be fit inside of like a test activity.java file, and so I've seen and used and tested Android apps, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. But there's a number of other pieces, and that whole thing had to be. So I don't know how difficult that was. I can't speak to that. at all. But based on the understanding that this was just going to be pushed to devices and executed using, compiling the sequences in XML and writing tests in Java, it was really very easy. There were actually very few hang-ups. Yeah. Anyone else?
So this runs on the device itself?
Yes.
So you have to install Test Federation on each device you're testing?
Well, so Trait Federation comes with the Android open source, but that's actually going to be on your dev box itself. So what it does is there's a portion of the Android test tools of the SDK it's called DBMS, it's a management system, and TradeFed just rides on top of DBMS and just issues commands, but the main thing that it does is it's multi-threaded, so you can do concurrent devices. And obviously, you can deploy it to an emulator, but emulators really aren't very useful for very much at all.
Yeah, does it run inside like the Eclipse IDE?
No, it's just a command line right now, but you can, I use Eclipse for writing the tests.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't run it.
You don't run it from there?
Yeah. I suppose, I don't think there'd be really, I can't envision any real use for that. I suppose if you've got a debugger, that the debugger would have to know everything locally on the device, so it just doesn't seem really feasible at this point. But just run it through the command line, but you code in an IDE and then push that to your source code.
So is your continuous integration server then hooked up to a bunch of devices or something?
Yeah, that's the next step that we hope to achieve, but we haven't accomplished that yet. Yeah, I'd really like to see some headless execution, and that's one reason why I say the CI is more valuable. And if you're not doing it with CI, then your value here is greatly diminished. Because you're able, I'm one man, I can say TF execute, run this test for me, and it's going to be however many tests, and it's going to do it in a row, and I'm going to have results, and that's wonderful, and that's fast. But as we already know, it's not saving time. You're rearranging your time. You're spending a lot more time coding. I think we're all very familiar with that. But if we can get all those, I don't want those tests to wait for me to push that button to have to execute. I want every new build to just have,
the post-build step in your continuous integration should be, hey, push the app to the device, hey, run this TradeFed script, and then when that's done, get a signal back to the CI to capture the results files, and then hopefully get the build quality from that.
Jenkins, for instance, right? You can have there's post-build jobs that you can have run, so this would be a great candidate for that. So. Okay, Samantha, are you ready? I think so. So, okay, as I get your piece ready right here,
Yes.
give yourself a little bit more of an introduction.
Perfect. Hey, hi, I'm Samantha, and it's really great to see everybody here tonight. I'll get to this in my next slide, but I'm actually a former employee of Quardev. And so for me, it's super cool to be back and to be in front of a group of testers and just to be talking about prototyping. And so I'm going to throw you guys a curveball. This is not actually a talk about testing. It's not a talk for testers. This is a talk. If you gotta go, please. But no, please stay. This is a talk that I developed for game developers. So what I'd like to do tonight is just have everybody forget that you're a tester and pretend that you're a game developer. Thank you very much. So, think of the most out there idea for a game that you can, and that you are programming, and you are making the art, and you are putting in the sound, and you are doing the ports to iPad, and you're doing the web version, and you're doing the Steam version, and you're doing the controller, and you're making all the graphics awesome and everything. So, and I want you to pretend that your financial future of your business depends on the game that you're working on. And with that in mind, I want to talk about how prototyping, and particularly prototyping in parallel, can improve your project. And with that in mind, we'll come back at the end to how can these lessons be applied to testing projects. So yes, I'm Samantha. I have a background in games, and I formerly worked at Amazon in Kindle Group, where I was building prototypes for an upcoming product, which I can't speak about, unfortunately. Before that, I was at Unity Technologies, which is developer of a game engine, integrated game engine and editor. So it's a multi-platform thing. You can make 3D games, put them out to all the different platforms. And I was QA director there. So that was a huge testing challenge of how do we test this thing. But I really got to get into the meat of how do you build a game. And I got to help a lot of people build games. And so I got to thinking a lot about building games. And before that, I was at Quardev. So, and Joe will remember this, even when I was here at Quardev, I was always thinking about games and learning all this great stuff about how to test and how to assess the quality, and thinking about it all in a game's context. So now when I'm making games, which I'm currently independent making games, I really think about design from a testing perspective. And I actually think that that's one of the things that prototyping does, is it helps us test and evaluate the design of the product. So at the beginning of a game development project, there's this long period of play where it's very exciting. There's, blue sky, blue ocean, anything is possible. It's all ideas back and forth, and a lot of excitement and communication, ideating and writing down things and imagining how great it will be when it's built. And then you have to build it. And it feels a lot more like work to actually sit and build this thing. And it's actually really scary too, because you have all these ideas, and so if I build this idea and this idea that I worked so hard to convince my entire team was the best idea possible doesn't work, what does that say? So what I'm wondering is there a way that we can combine these two things of maintaining that play and feeling of fun that we all feel at the beginning of a project, with the hard work that it's required to actually finish a project. And I think prototyping is a way to do it. Specifically prototyping prototyping in parallel, rather than simply doing all the prototyping at the front. So I want to ask you, what is a prototype? Right? So here we have two MAME arcade cabinets. If you're not familiar with MAME, let me know. Okay, so MAME is a multi-arcade machine emulator, so you can run like Street Fighter on your computer. So these are two cabinets, like a video game arcade cabinet that somebody built. One of them is a prototype. Which one? Do we know which one? Which one's the prototype? Do we know? Right, it's this one on the left. But why? Right? Because these things, if you look at them, they're both fundamentally made of the same components. They have a computer, they have a monitor, they have a bunch of joysticks and buttons, they have a trackpad, and then they have the software, and they have the content that's running on the machine.
The cardboard is what tipped me off.
The cardboard, okay. Now, that's a good point. So I would say that one of these is a prototype because you could not sell it. It's a learning project. One of them you are selling for profit, for money, as a product. So in this sense, you can think about a prototype as anything that facilitates learning that gets wrapped into a real product. And there are so many things that could have been learned, right? Like particularly this, I love this stack here because it's like you probably started with this one and went, oh, like that's too low, like I need to bring it up a bit. And it facilitates all the learning for what goes into the real thing that you're building. This is a slide I stole from the internet called design thinking. Where it's on the page, what is design thinking? And when I look at it, I see the scientific method. You have this hypothesis, you test it out, and then you record the results. And so the prototype aspect of the scientific method to me is this one. It's the thing that you have to build in order to test your ideas. So how do we build an effective prototype? Well, an effective prototype has to be effective in this landscape. So in order to have an effective prototype, you actually have to have effective ideas and effective feedback. So what are effective ideas? When I was working here at Quardev, I had this mentor named Roy McMillian, who's a fabulous man. And he got me thinking about testing as asking questions. And I applied that throughout my testing career. It's like, okay, well, here's a product, or here's a new web page. I have to figure out how this works. Now, what does this do? What does this do? What does this do? These are all questions. These are all ideas for how to test the software. So if we think about testing as questions, we can also think about prototyping as questions and ideas as questions. And in the beginning of a project, or when you're making a game in particular, you tend to have very broad questions. How would it feel if I had a racing game where your wheels are made out of like gummy worms? Or would it be fun if I could run on the ceiling? And these are really hard questions to answer unless you use a subjective answer where everybody has a different opinion and the best opinion wins. So think about specific questions. How quickly should sprinting deplete the player's stamina meter? You can answer this objectively, right? Because you can say, well, we want it to be for 10 meters because we want, this is a game about jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and the maximum length of our roofs is going to be 20 meters. So we don't want people to be able to sprint across more than half the rooftop. So therefore, it should take the amount of time that it takes to run across 10 meters to go from 100% to 0%. And you can answer that objectively in the spirit of what you're trying to accomplish with your game design. This is a prototype of a game called Sen, which is a music game that I made. I made this prototype a couple of years ago. It was the first prototype that I made, and I had very broad questions about this prototype. I wanted to know, I was trying to do something really new, right? You play most music games like you're playing a plastic guitar. I wanted to make a game where you don't have a guitar, but you are making a unique song. And so my questions are, will this work? Like I had this idea for like, kind of Simon Says, like, will it work to have different sounds that play back, and will the song actually be different from player to player? Very broad. So in order to test the answers to these questions, I had to build all the systems. I basically had to build the game, which meant I had to build like a procedural mesh generation, I had to write a musical sequencer, I had to build some physics for the background graphics, and I had to do just like a bunch of input stuff on the mouse and keyboard, and like it took me 4 months to build this thing. And I built it, and I understood it, and I thought that it was working when I played it, and then I put it in front of people, and nobody understood it. I actually submitted it to an experimental game workshop at the Game Developers Conference, and the evaluators couldn't understand it, so they rejected it. So I did another version. I did a second prototype. And this prototype you can play on the map on a site called congregate.com. And I had, again, very broad questions with this version of the game. I wanted to know, okay, well, people didn't understand this and that, so what if I changed it from 1 track to 4 tracks, and I made the tracks explicit, and then like I made it more explicit, like all the different things you could touch to make sounds, instead of like abstracting that a little bit more. And so in order to test these ideas, or to answer these subjective questions, I had to change some systems, I had to write new systems, I had to fix bugs in the existing systems. It took me another 3 months to do this. And then I actually ran out of money after this because I couldn't keep going, so I had to get a job at Amazon. And then I quit Amazon a couple of years later, and then I returned. I returned to this game, and I made a new prototype. This took me 4 days to do. And the questions that I was trying to answer were highly specific. The questions are restricted to, how can I visually differentiate the different types of sound blocks from each other for people who are colorblind? And I had a new idea for like a stacking game mechanic rather than
overlap mechanic, not to go into the details too much. I thought, does this stacking mechanic work? And is it fun? But in order to do that, I wanted to make sure that it was going to be fun without the game music. Like, it's a music game. If it's fun without the actual sounds, then it's just going to be more fun when the sounds are added. So with these highly specialized, with these highly focused questions, I was able to get these questions answered in a much, much shorter time. I threw away all the code and started over. So this one, this slide is trying to say that I didn't realize that I was working with a very large scope of prototypes. I had these huge scope prototypes because I had these very broad questions. And once I figured out the questions that I really needed to know first, I was able to build them very lightweight. I really got crushed under the large scope of these prototypes. This was these two prototypes, 3 months and 4 months. It's 7 months versus 4 days to make progress. And so I learned that the price of scope is time. And on a development project of any kind, time is precious. So keep your scope focused and know where you're aiming, so that when you have to fire that bullet, which is shipping the game, you know that you're going to hit the bullseye. Finally, the question of effective feedback. Once we've built something, how do we get effective feedback? You might have, depending on the team, and again, this is more specific for games. I thought of this in thinking about games and small teams. You might have a democratic approach where everybody votes and then the most votes wins. Or you might have a socialist approach where everybody has to agree or no decision is made. You might also have a dictatorial approach where one person says, it will be this way. So how are you going to learn? Like, who are you going to show your prototypes to? And this can get into user research and the entire field of that, about collecting unbiased feedback from people. And there's no best way to do it, and it's going to be different for everybody, but you should know how you're going to get your answers before you get really deep into this. Otherwise, you'll have built something that's great and not be able to learn anything from it. So finally, I want to leave you with this, that testing and prototyping, testing the design of an idea, is a lot like taking a road trip. I'll even say building software is like going on a road trip. You know where you are, and you know where you want to be, but you don't exactly know how you're going to get to where you want to be. So sometimes you come to a fork in the road, and you go, well, we could build it for Android, or we could build it for iPhone. Maybe that's too broad. We could build it in using framework A or framework B. Let's say we're making a 2D game. Are we going to use Cocos 2D, or are we going to use some other thing? And prototyping is like stopping the car, getting out, and then taking a short stroll down one road and seeing what's down there. And then you stroll down the other road. And it takes a little time to walk down each path, and you don't go the whole length of the road, but then you can see just enough of what's ahead to know when you get back in your car which way you're going to go. And with that, I will say thank you very much. And if we have time, I can open it up for questions. Questions?
So then, what is the prototype that a tester creates? And what's the feedback that they
That's
get?
a great question. What is a prototype that you would create? If you're working on a website, I'm a firm believer that everyone should build prototypes, and that prototypes don't have to be beautiful, right? So if you're a tester on a website and you have questions about the design of a page that's being built or the entire site, you can prototype the thing with paper. And you can step through, like, okay, here I have the page, I'm going to click this, and then now this drop-down menu appears, so I'll place that down. And then I push this, and then I come to this other page. So I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I actually want to encourage everybody to build prototypes, and build prototypes that are particular to your projects, so that you can, I've sat down there and looked at a design spec and a technical spec,
and then known that I was going to have 3 months before I was going to be able to test something, and just been like, how can I answer any of these burning questions, or how can I be influential in a positive way on this project? And if you're waiting for a developer who's, shoulder deep in code, then they're not going to have time to think about anything but the code. But if you're thinking about the experience, the user experience, and the quality of that experience, then you can actually use the tools at your disposal to build prototypes to try to answer your own questions. And of your peers. And of your peers, yes.
Just following on that, another really, really useful place for prototyping, for testing, is if your team is just getting into automation, or you're trying to you got limitations in what you're currently doing for automation. There's all sorts of test frameworks and UI automation versus other approaches and so forth. Which of these is going to work right? Well, hey, take a shot at it, and usually that's the hardest part of automation, is establishing a viable framework.
Absolutely.
And if you just start getting into one.
And a framework, an automation framework is a tool that we use to help us do things that would either take too long or are too hard to do manually completely, right? So in that case, the tool should do what it's meant to do. So if you are able to prototype a flow where you know that we have these 3 areas of the software and that we're going to have 50 tests for each one, then how is this framework going to logically step through each one? You can actually use little dice or chess pieces or anything that helps you visualize the domain and then step through that. You can even just do it with pen and paper. That's a prototype. You can go to your project manager and say, this is how I think the automation framework should work, so that if we get caught here, we know we can debug here or we can debug here, and we should see these kinds of results. How does this look to you? So that's definitely, in terms of evaluating tools, it's a little trickier, but it's definitely, I think that there are lessons you can take from prototyping. If you're in a prototyping mentality, then you can apply that to any problem that you're looking at.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So I have done design level testing for projects, and what I've found myself a little bit afraid of my questions scope becoming too small. So in terms of the purpose of the prototype, as you're describing, keeping the scope small and on target, I fully get the rather immense value of that. But when we are trying to determine the right questions to ask, how can you describe the trade-off or the pros and cons of keeping questions broad versus keeping questions very defined?
Sure. The broader your question is, I would say it's more about, is the question answered subjectively or objectively? If it's subjective, then you're looking at an inherently larger scope of a prototype to answer that question or to facilitate learning. So if your questions are broad but objective, then you will probably have a larger scope than if you had small objective questions. But it's all about, is there time and room in the schedule to take this time to build this? Is it going to take a month or is it going to take a week, and can we afford that time? So there's always a little bit of a trade-off there.
Thank you.
So you had the 7-month project and you had the 4-day project?
Yes.
And doesn't it seem like you couldn't have done the 4-day project without having done the 7-month project first?
That's a good question. For me, building games has been about learning. And the questions that were on the table after that 7-month project were not there at the beginning of that 7-month project. Still, if I had been able to think about the actual pieces of the project that I was trying to build in a more objective way, or thinking about what is this one little piece and how can I make sure that this works, I could have built something simpler at the beginning. And a lot of this are lessons that I learned in building a lot of prototypes at Amazon for a long time. So simply, I didn't know how to do it at the beginning. I thought the only way to do it was to start building the game and see what happened. So what I want to put out there is that you don't have to build the product to answer your questions. You can build something in parallel by yourself, simply for the purpose of facilitating learning.
You mentioned that prototypes don't have to look beautiful. I'd like to go a bit further and say that if your prototype looks too beautiful, people will think that it's much further along than it actually is.
That's true. That's true. And it's all about what questions you're trying to answer. If you have questions that are primarily about the visualization of the software, then you probably need a highly beautiful but non-functioning prototype. I think I'm out of time. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Please feel free to
That was sort of
what?
He's in his, let the man rest.
He was brilliant. Brilliant son of a bitch.
Dave, come on.
All right, thank you.
Here, tell us about yourself.
All right, so my name is Dave Mozealous. I'm a quality assurance manager for Amazon, specifically Amazon Local. So today I wanted to talk about using image comparison to improve UI testing, and just tell you some of my experiences with it and kind of how I got started in it. So I want to go back to 2007. So this is right around the time that I initially got involved with quality assurance testing. So I was working at Adobe at the time and decided that I wasn't too big of a fan of Adobe, so I quit my job at Adobe and I went to work for a competitor. One of the tools that this competitor was building was a PowerPoint to Flash converter. It was specifically around e-learning, so it was taking PowerPoint content and converting it to Flash. So essentially, it wasn't just about just taking PowerPoint content and then converting it to Flash. So it wasn't just like images, right? It was like native PowerPoint objects getting converted to native Flash objects. So it's not just PNGs getting spitted out, getting converted to Flash. It's like each one of those individual objects, getting them converted to Flash, and maintaining their vector format, the ability to support animations. So that's the tool that we were working on building, and I was responsible for testing it. So it was like to test it, like what I do is I go about how the approach that we took to testing it was that we would manually publish like hundreds of PowerPoint presentations, and would manually verify that the Flash output matched PowerPoint. And like if you guys are comfortable with using PowerPoint, you guys know PowerPoint, there's like millions of combinations in PowerPoint, right? So there's millions of things that would have to get converted from PowerPoint to Flash. So it's like a very tedious process. And one of the things that we noticed was that it's like you could go through and you could compare like the PowerPoint output to the Flash-based output, and you'd catch a lot of it. But the difficulty was like there's a lot of changes that if you were just looking at them side by side or just switching back and forth, it was often difficult to capture some of the very subtle differences. So can you guys see like what can you guys point out some of the image differences here? The bullets. Bullets are missing, yeah, that's one of them.
The bottom right dot is a slightly different size as well as the icon. The ribbon is lower res.
Yep. So the size is different.
Gradient,
right? I missed gradient when I was originally testing this. So you'll notice here that the gradient goes from the Flash-based output, it goes right to left. And then on the PowerPoint, it goes center out. So I missed it. So we launched this product after months and months of testing. I missed that. So that was just one of the many things that I missed when I was manually testing this. So skip forward a couple months later, I'm at the bar. So I'm at the bar, I'm with a couple friends. They're at the bar with this girl that I'm trying to impress, and her name's Diane. We're sitting at the bar, and I was like, we should play Photo Hunt, or I don't know if you guys are familiar with Photo Hunt or the bar equivalent, but there's a more adult version of Photo Hunt that's at the game at most of the bars. So it's like the same type of thing. So we're sitting there and we're playing Photo Hunt, and I'm like, I'm a quality assurance engineer. I should be awesome at this, right? This is what I've done for the last like several years. Is like I've compared two images, right? I'm going to be awesome at this. Like I'm going to just totally impress this girl. So I go through and I find that the obvious image, like the obvious differences in the images, but it takes me some time. So I find the differences in the images. But I don't get that far. So I do okay, but I don't do great. So my friend Connor comes over. My friend Connor's just like, is that the best you can do? So I was like, well, let's see if you can do better. So I put in money for him to play. The guy just flies through everything, just nails everything that's there, just goes through. And I was like, what the hell? There's no way anybody can be this good at this game. So Connor has this ability. What the assumptions that I made is like Connor, he must have played this game all the time. Like that's the reason why he's better at this than I am. He must have just played it. He's memorized all the differences. But that wasn't the case. Like what Connor had an ability to do what's called free fusing. So what he was able to do is he kind of goes cross-eyed. So he'll step back, he'll go cross-eyed, he'll look at the two images, and then allow them to cross over. So in doing that, what he was able to do is just kind of see where the differences were because he could kind of cross them over. So Connor was just able to go through and then do this. Much better at it than I was able to do. So, 2011, we're about to release a new version of this product. New publishing engine for PowerPoint to Flash converter. So I was like, man, I got to do this whole thing again. I know Connor's better at it than I am, and I was like, maybe I should hire Connor because he can do it better than I am. So the next thing I hear is talk with the owner of the company, with my boss, and he's like, well, not only are we going to publish to Flash, but we're also going to do HTML5. So I was like, great, so that's twice as much work, So I was like, oh man, double the work, double the effort. And then I started thinking about it more, and I was like, well, HTML5, and then I was like, so Flash, it's fine to test. When I was just testing Flash, I could test it in any browser because Flash is the same. In Firefox, Flash is the same in Chrome, Flash is the same in IE, right? Use Flash plugin. But with HTML5, it's not that way. Something that's one way in HTML5 in Chrome might look substantially different in Firefox or IE9 or any of the other browsers. So then we decided that HTML5 needed to work in Firefox, Chrome, iPad, and Safari. I was like, man, this is just going to take me forever. This is going to take years. So testing this would literally take 6 times the amount of work that it initially took me. So I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started thinking, and I was like, this would be so much easier if I just had snapshots of the output. So, it was like when we were publishing it from PowerPoint to Flash, we had a nice little player with all this player Chrome. I was like, if I could eliminate that and then just compare an image from PowerPoint to Flash, it would just be so much easier. So I could go back to my photo hunt days and just compare the images, right? That's the idea that I had. So what I did was I built I built a tool using Selenium to actually just go through the PowerPoint presentation and then just take screenshots of each one of the slides. So I knew Selenium could take screenshots, so I built the script that used Selenium to loop through the presentation and then take the screenshots of the output. And now I could compare those screenshots to the images, and it would just be much faster doing that. But still, it was problematic. The issues of the gradient, which I didn't catch before, I might be able to catch this time, I might not. So I looked at, on a daily basis, what I'd do is I'd set up, as soon as the build was finished, I'd install the build and then literally publish hundreds of different PowerPoint presentations and then take screenshots of the output. So then I found a tool called Image Magic, and I don't know if you guys have heard of Image Magic, but among the capabilities of Image Magic is it allows you to compare 2 images and then actually create a composite image of the 2. So I started using this Image Magic tool. Also found out that it had a command line interface, so it's you could do this all programmatically. So I didn't actually have to do anything manually. It's just I could publish the presentations, have them automatically compared, and then spit out a difference. And so it would go pixel by pixel and compare the images. So that's how it worked. You would take image on the left, image on the right, compare each pixel. And it would count the pixels that were different, and then it would spit out what the pixel difference count was. So if the pixel difference count was high, then I knew that that was something that I would have to look at. So like here's kind of like an example of how this would work. So it's like you have the PowerPoint and then you have the Flash. So it's like I pointed out previously that the issues that I was able to catch is like this one. Also notice there that there's 2 there versus that. There's that spot up there that's missing, but I couldn't find the other differences. So with Image Magic, what it allows me to do is create like a composite image. So it creates the composite image and then we'll take each one of the pixels that are different and colors them red. So here you can quickly see what the differences are. So there's a difference there and there's a difference there that I wasn't able to catch manually. So if we go back to that, then we can kind of see what the difference is, like where the differences are, right? So how we use this at Amazon. So it's, we do all sorts of testing at Amazon in an automated way. So we do our integration tests, we do our user integration, we do our unit tests, we do our service level tests. And then, we do some UI testing with Selenium. But, Selenium's really good at capturing, like checking if a button works, like checking if a hyperlink works, checking elements that are supposed to be on a page. But if there's elements that are on a page that aren't supposed to be there, that's really difficult to catch with Selenium, right? Or like that type of UI-based testing tool. So with, by doing image-based comparison, you can compare the outputs. And so you can compare what it actually looks like to what it's supposed to look like. So you can validate, several different things on a page without like actually checking individual elements of a page. So it's like in one test, you can validate like hundreds of different elements appear as they're supposed to appear. So there's a little more about how we use this at Amazon. So it's like we used it in some instances to compare like a beta environment to a prod environment. So if you want to compare like, okay, so we're making some changes to beta. This is how it looks on beta. This is how it looks on prod. We didn't think that there was anything supposed to change, but is that actually the case? So if we check beta, we check prod, capture screenshots of both, and then compare the images, we can see the differences between the two. You can also use it to compare like beta to like a known good image. So if you have like new design comps or something like that, you can compare it and then see where the differences are between what's implemented and what it was supposed to look like. And then we can also use it to compare like based on time. So like how do things look today versus how they looked yesterday. So that's it. So that's kind of how we've been using like UI image comparison at Amazon and how I've kind of used it throughout my career to help me in automated testing. So put a couple more information up here. So it's like my contact information. So I'm on Twitter, my email address, where you can download Image Magic if you guys are interested. And some info about the best photo hunt player in the world. So it's a really good story about like the guy that's like the best photo hunt player in the world. Who's like he can do the free fusing where he crosses his eyes and brings the images together. And there's another talk that I thought was really interesting. I think it was at Google I/O, or it might have just been a Selenium meetup that was in, or a meetup that was in San Francisco about how Google does continuous delivery, where they talk about how they do this. So at Google, what they do is they use the reason why they got into it was they were using the tool Google, I think it's Google Surveys. They accidentally shipped something to prod that where there was an element in a page that there wasn't supposed to be. There was like a monster that was like running across the page. It was like somehow it was in beta. Somebody didn't catch it through their automated test and it got automatically pushed to production. So this is why they started doing it at Google. I thought that it was a really interesting talk too. And then another talk that's on automated mobile UI testing using by like one of the original developers of Sakuli, if anybody's familiar with that, which I also thought was a pretty interesting, talk too. So that's it. So.
Thanks very much.
So any questions?
Have you had any geospatial experience before this?
Like, what do you mean by that?
Like raster analysis with like bands, like satellite data, because this is actually something similar is done fairly frequently. If not with Image Magic, with something like Geo or something like that.
I do not have any specific experience with that. It was actually, like now at Amazon, we initially were using Image Magic But we decided, one of the members of my team built like an internal tool to kind of give us a little bit more flexibility than ImageMagick offered.
Yeah.
But I don't have any experience in that specific area now. So.
Raster's a raster.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounded like your process was, you actually still had to look at the images though?
To some extent. So it's like, it depends on how you're using it.
Right.
So in the initial example of like comparing the PowerPoint to Flash, that if it's exact match, no, you don't, right?
So you get a report, like an email says 0, you win.
So initially what we did was like we would publish the hundreds of different PowerPoint presentations. So you might have 100 different PowerPoint presentations and say 100 slides in there. So quick math on that, what is that? 1,000, 10,000, whatever, 10,000 slides. And then it would go through those and then it would email us a result of like what are the slides that we have to look at. So, conceivably what we could have done is like have each one of those just become its own separate bug. But we didn't go that route. So it was like we wanted to have some sort of like manual intervention that it was like, see like how big of an issue it was. With ImageMagick and some of the other tools you can put in, there's like a fuzzy filter. So, when you're trying to compare something like PowerPoint that might have like thousands of different shapes on a slide, maybe if things are off by a pixel or two, you really don't care, right? So with ImageMagick, you can put in there like a fuzzy tolerance like threshold. So if like the image is within, like I think even if you go back to this image that I have here, that I put in like a 5% margin of error. So this would only tell me like the significant differences. So if that makes sense. Yeah.
Did the dude who could do the photo hunt by eye, did he have to have them side by side?
I believe he did. So
it was only in that manner that he could do it?
Exactly.
Okay.
So because it was like how he did it with his eyes, like going cross-eyed and then singing. It was funny because actually it was like, I haven't talked to the guy in like 5 years. So it was like when we did this, I lived out in California at the time, down in San Diego, and it's like I haven't seen him, but he follows me on Twitter. So I posted like last night on Twitter that I was like doing this talk today, and I was like, and I'm also going to be talking about photo hunt. And then so he responds to my Twitter like post, and he's like, if you need me to fly in to be an expert witness, like I'm more than happy to do it. And I was like, funny that you're actually in the presentation. So.
When you guys supported HTML5 as well, do you also have to support CSS?
Yeah, and it's like that's the same nightmare, right? And that's the difficulty is like with CSS, HTML5, and how that renders in each one of those different browsers, it can be drastically different, right? So yeah.
Is it just 3 or multiple versions of CSS you can support?
I don't totally recall all the differences that we used. So this was, it was a year ago that I was with them, but yeah, they're like, I don't know, it wasn't pure HTML5 everywhere. Some of it was like, just JavaScript based, changes and that type of stuff. So, yeah.
So you said somebody internal at Amazon helped build the internal tool to basically provide some more flexibility. And I know from work a friend of mine did, probably 12 years ago, that image comparison, especially when you start talking about that fuzzy factor.
Yeah.
How much of a shift should I ignore? How much of a shade difference should I ignore? That type of stuff will just peg direct image comparison. Did your team do anything pulling from a library, image comparison or imaging libraries that
check for that type of stuff?
Yeah, because doing that all by hand, I think. Do you guys have concerns about internal maintenance of such an internal tool?
Not right now. But not right now. So it's like most of where we focused this on initially was on the on the mobile side is where we really focused initially. Sure. Where most of the stuff isn't going to change very much, like in terms of shifting pixel, like a couple pixels here versus there. So no, we haven't had to deal with that at this point, but that could be a concern. Yeah.
Did you have a situation where you knew there was going to be a difference on something, a button that shows up in one particular browser or something that wasn't in the others?
No, not that I can think of. I'm trying to think of a specific example of that where something like, so like would your concern be that it's like you test in one browser and then in a different browser, like something would have shown, so it's like you didn't catch something because it appeared in one browser that you weren't testing?
That you would have some sort of an artifact or something in one browser that would be okay to have in that browser.
No.
So you'd simply end up having to mask it out or something.
No, but so like I work at Amazon Local, so no, like to that specific example, but one of the difficult things that we have at Amazon Local, so I work for Amazon Local, which is a part of Amazon, which is, if you guys aren't familiar with Amazon Local, it's fairly similar at this point to like Living Social or Groupon. So one of the challenges we did face initially was that on several of the pages, we have elements on the page that are dynamic, right? So it's like you'll have a countdown or a purchase counter, which are dynamic, right? So then it's like, how do you do an image comparison if you know something's going to change, right? And that is fine that it changes. So it's like the way that we're approaching that now is that we highlight the elements that are dynamic. So it's like, well, if we know that something is not supposed, or that is something is going to change, then we just hide that element before we take the screenshot. So using Selenium, I forget what exactly it is, but it's like we hide the element, we take the screenshot. So that's one approach. We don't have very many dynamic, we know the purchase counter, the time clock, that those things are be dynamic, so we can hide those. There's other ways that you can do it too, is like, we've talked with a couple people at Microsoft, and what they do is that they only take screenshots of elements, they take screenshots of elements and then compare element to element, right? So since there's so few things on our page that are dynamic, we can just hide the dynamic ones and know that we'll be okay.
At least you know that you haven't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know that you haven't actually tested them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Good.
There must be shading differences that come up where the delta is much higher than, say, 5% across the pixel-to-pixel comparison, right? But that yet you guys...
So for the PowerPoint to Flash converter, yeah, there was. That was the thing that was interesting too, and that was one of those subtle differences that that would be really difficult to catch by the eye. But those are things that when we were doing the PowerPoint to Flash conversion, it was like it had to be spot on. So it had to be the exact same color. So it was like the fact that it would catch that was a good thing, right? So yeah, there might be scenarios where you would just be like, well, okay, it's, and I'm not very good at my hex colors, but where it's like very, very subtle in the difference, and that you would be okay with it. But for the testing for PowerPoint to Flash, we were concerned with that. So it was like, it had to match.
I see.
The other thing you can do there is, again, depending on your imaging tool, you can say, gosh, FFFF color is close enough to FFFE.
Yeah.
That I'll ignore that, and that's part of your fuzzy factor.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
If you don't care as much about spot on.
Yeah, definitely.
But then there again, it comes into libraries, tools, and maintenance.
Yeah.
Where this kind of comparison, I've seen a few of them homegrown, and it can get long.
It definitely can. Cool.
So were these slides rendered with Flash or HTML?
No, it was. I'm not a big fan of Flash anymore, so it's all made in PowerPoint. So yeah, not a big fan of PowerPoint either. But better than Flash. So, cool. All right. Well, thank you guys very much.
So Jacob, typically we have the presenter do the drawing. But since you're consistent,
You can do it.
All right, you guys all ready? Did everybody put their...
does anybody want to throw a card in?
Didn't have a card.
Yeah, all right.